or a split squat variation, where you can really bring your quads to its failure versus the other things taking over. So other muscles taking over or other things being the limiting factor. So when we're training for hypertrophy, I like to use something called an RIR or an RPE scale. So this is basically just telling you how many reps you have left in the tank. So RIR is reps in reserve. RPE is kind of the inverse scale, and it's your rate of perceived exertion. So with RIR, that's telling us where that effective rep range is. However, if we're using RIR in our training, so for example, if you are following a program and it says get to 2 reps in reserve or get to 1 rep in reserve, the only way that you're gonna know how many reps you have in reserve or how many reps you have left in the tank is if you take the movement you're doing to failure at some point. So something to think about, if you never take any movements to failure, how are you gonna know what your true RIR scale is? We know from the research actually that a lot of people underestimate their RIR scale. We've seen research multiple times that shows that people think that they're at a 1 RIR, but then they keep going and they end up getting like 3 or 4 or 5 more reps before they actually hit failure. Again, you need to pick and choose the ones that you know are gonna be safe for you, but taking some movements to failure is important to be able to gauge that RIR scale. How often should you go to failure? It's going to depend on, again, the movement that you're going to failure with and also your overall training plan and your overall training program. So when I'm mentioning the movement, if we were to take, for example, an RDL or a hack squat to failure, that's gonna cause a lot of fatigue within our central nervous system, right? Because it's a very taxing movement. You're using a lot of muscle groups. So with that type of movement, we don't necessarily want to take that to failure all the time or very frequently. Versus another movement, which is maybe a smaller muscle group like a lateral raise or a tricep extension or a bicep curl, those you can probably take to failure more often because it's going to be a smaller muscle group. There's not much kind of central fatigue involved there. So those are going to be a little bit safer to take to failure more often. So in general, you don't necessarily want to train to failure all the time or on all of your movements, but you probably should be training to failure at some points and picking movements that are safe for that to make sure that you're getting within that effective rep range so that you can build as much muscle as possible.